Okay, Austin, like I mentioned in the V1 analysis, I actually think you've got a pretty good move altogether. If you weren't experiencing what you feel like is a little flinching or a little bit of necessity to sort of scoop and save that at the bottom, I'd say you actually have a pretty functional movement. A few things in there that are definitely causing probably a little bit of inconsistency in the way we hit the ground, and you feeling like you've got to fire the hands a little bit to hit the shot that you're trying to create. We're going to tackle this in a couple of different ways. As mentioned in the V1, the pivot piece of not seeing that lower body rotate enough and the issues that causes, and then being able to structure the hands and arms to where they're not having to change so much. So we can sort of shift a few of those pieces to where if we pivot a little bit more correctly, then the hands and arms don't have to do so much. So we're going to hit this from two directions. The first thing we're going to talk about is the pivot a little bit. So what I got set up here is I've got basically an orange stick that would be your target line, and I've laid down another club, or it could be another alignment rod. It's about 20, 30 degrees inward, as you can see that. It doesn't necessarily have to be super specific, but basically what we're looking for is if you're to take address to that golf ball, right, as you're making your backstroke, and you can put this alignment rod through belt loops or whatever you want to do, as you make backstrokes, we definitely want to start seeing that alignment rod that's attached to our pelvis is rotating. And from that view, you'll notice that the legs have certainly changed flex a little bit, exactly the same way that they're going to in a golf swing. That's necessary when I'm going to actually have correct pelvic rotation. That left leg's going to flex a little bit, or the knee might be moving, left knee might be moving a little bit more towards my right knee. And this right leg's going to lengthen a little bit. So I'm going to see that little bit of tilt that we see out of Steve, and we're going to see the pelvic rotation that's correct. What that allows us to do is have the rotation going forward in the downswing to be our motor. When we don't have that, when we've really limited the lower body rotation, it's really asking the hands and arms to have to do a lot and change a bunch in a short period of time. There's some guys that are very successful with that matchup. I actually teach that to a lot of guys. There'd be a couple different alignments that I'd have for lead arm and exactly how the wrists work. But if we're already feeling like the wrists and the hands are having to be a little active, we can go sort of the other way on the spectrum and get those to calm down. So that's certainly the first piece. As you're hitting some of these shots and little pitch shots, definitely want you to feel like there's a little bit more pelvic rotation. We don't have to feel like those legs are so static, trying to stay still, and we're doing it all with the hands and arms and upper body. We're certainly allowed to have a little bit of rotation. That's going to lengthen our hand path, which is going to smooth things out and get a little bit more time to strike the golf ball and in a much flatter fashion of how long that club is close to the ground, moving in more of a straight line to the target. So that's the pivot piece. We've definitely got to have a little bit more rotation. If we think about the other thing I said in the V1, is that we certainly see that lead arm is going to be deep enough at that point, correctly so through pivot, instead of feeling like it's outward and then having to get back inward. And especially when I guess I'm trying to hit high shots, probably bounce into that golf ball a lot, trying to scoop it up in the air. So once we've got the pivot a little bit better and the lower body is actually rotating, how we start calming the hands and arms down, very simply, I just kind of alignment rod, throw a wedge here, and we're going to start looking a lot more like Stricker or somebody that's going to be very quiet with the hands and arms. I'm going to actually have you hit some chip shots, some smaller shots, where you address that golf ball, and you can push this alignment rod in farther or out more, to where it's really just kind of stick under your left pec right there. You could experiment a little bit with right in your sternum, but that's not really going to be great. We're not going to have any shaftling at that point, which we need. We're going to go kind of on just under the left pec right there, and we're going to hit some shots to where we have to keep that alignment rod in contact with that same spot right there. What that forces us to do, right? I'm going to have to certainly rotate this pelvis like we've talked about, okay, which is again something that we need to make happen, but you're obviously not going to see any change in the hands and arms and wrists. So if we can get comfortable with actually hitting that golf shot, feeling like there's no hands and arms change in backstroke, certainly what we see in Stricker when we draw those same angles from shaft to shoulder and then the right arm on it, they don't change the entire way through the stroke. His entire stroke is motored through his rotations in his rib cage and his pelvis. And that's why he's such a consistent chipper and pitcher with a golf ball, never really struggles out anything, creates great contact. Okay, so we're going to hit some of those shots where we've got some amount of almost like an anchored position so we can't change the hands and arms. What we'll really start to feel is that we have to strike that golf ball with the rotation from the body. That's your biggest piece. We've really limited the lower body in the backstroke, and it requires the hands and arms to do a lot. So you're gonna hit just a couple of little chip shots. I'm gonna hit one or two here, where it's not big shots, but basically it's just back and forward, and you see how quickly that ball actually pops up in the air. We don't need a bunch of throwing of the shaft to try and have all this loft. Even your high shots, your best pitchers and chippers of this golf ball, are gonna have 5 to 10 degrees of shaft lean in that high soft shot. But they've got the loft structured open for another reason. So as we're making these backstrokes, we think we could hit a lower shot by having really no pronation out of the lead arm, and we'd see that there's not going to be any rotation at all in the wrist or any change there. We'd hit sort of lower shots from that position, okay? We could strike that golf ball and flight a little shot down without changing anything at all. We can make that same backstroke, but if we have some rotation, kind of pronating the forearm and the wrist, we'd see that the loft gets open up, and we can hit the exact same shot with loft. So instead of feeling like the wrists have to change from flexion to extension while they're rotating and hinging up or cocking down, where there's like 6 degrees of freedom that we're trying to manage, we can limit that to really 1 in terms of the pronation of the forearm and the wrist there. Motoring the stroke with the rotation of the body eliminates the necessity of the arms and hands to feel like they're trying to create a bunch of the shot, trying to create the loft lay, trying to hit the ground the right way. We can get our geometry very consistent if we're conceptually anchoring our wedge. We obviously aren't anchoring it when the shaft's not in there. But if we're making that movement to where it's much more of a fixed position for those arms to not change a ton, then we don't really have much flinching in rotation. We don't really stop our rotation, right? The rotation is going to continue smoothly. The speed at which we rotate is really going to dictate our shot length. And then we can manage our loft just basically, either it's set up, we could open more loft, we could, if you feel comfortable, letting that pronate in backstroke for higher shots. Whatever you'd like to do, you've got that option, but you're not asking your hands to be good at hinging up, hinging down, pronating, supinating, flexing, extending, all in a short period of time. We can eliminate that, put it in just really 2 degrees of freedom of some amount of rotation, not feeling like you got to try and add loft through there. We can set that up and address. Big thing for you is the rotational piece. None of that's possible if the lower body's not going to rotate. We think if the lower body's not going to rotate, it's just the upper body, we're going to see that shaft pop off every time. That requires us to time up lining those things back up, which I think is where you're seeing that little flinch when you're trying to add loft or maybe even take loft off. You're trying to time some stuff up that doesn't feel super consistent. We can remove that very effectively. Stricker, Bryson DeChambeau, 2 guys on that end of the spectrum that do it fantastic. They're good wedgers of the golf ball. It's about changing the pivot, changing the motor for you of your shot, and then being able to have some consistency through the entire movement in the hands and arms and not seeing them change drastically through there. Again, there's not a ton wrong with the movement you're making if you feel comfortable timing a lot of those things up. If you were to simply add the pelvic rotation. But if you're really struggling with these hands and arms, you're certainly going to have the pelvic rotation no matter what, but you could certainly feel like you're not seeing this club change a bunch of where the butt would be pointed. We can certainly hit these shots effectively short distances, feeling like the hands and arms and torso really stay in one piece as they rotate through, like you see in Stricker in the videos that I kind of put you side by side with. Very effective wedger of the golf ball doing that. So work on that pivot, work on calming those hands and arms down with that simple drill, and shoot me some video back and let me know if you're feeling better or worse in terms of the hands. Make sure that you're headed the right direction, give you a little checkup in a week or so. Hope you're having a great day. Talk to you soon.